The Persian cat sat perfectly still on the sandbags, her amber eyes fixed on something no one else could see. Private First Class Danny Martinez thought nothing of it at first. Just another stray that had wandered into Firebase Phoenix, somewhere in the dusty outskirts of Fallujah, 2004. But in the next 60 seconds, that cat would save 43 American lives. War has a way of stripping away everything unnecessary. Your favorite music doesn't matter when mortars are falling. Your college degree means nothing when you're diving for cover. But sometimes, in the midst of all that chaos and death, the universe sends you a guardian angel. Sometimes that angel has whiskers and an attitude problem. They called her Sergeant Whiskers. No one remembered who came up with the name, but it stuck. She'd shown up 3 weeks earlier, skinny and mean, hissing at anyone who tried to pet her. The Marines fed her MRE crackers and tuna from care packages. She tolerated them, nothing more. That morning she was different. Martinez watched her ears swivel like radar dishes. Her tail twitched once, twice. Then she did something that made his blood run cold. She bolted. Not the lazy stretch and stroll of a barn cat. This was pure, primal fear. The kind of movement that says death is coming. In Iraq, you learn to read the signs. The birds that go silent before an attack. The way locals disappear from the streets. The eerie calm that descends like a shroud before all hell breaks loose. But a cat? That was new. Martinez had 2 seconds to make a decision that would echo through the rest of his life. Incoming! The word tore from his throat before his brain fully processed what he was doing. Pure instinct. Pure trust in a fleeing feline. The other Marines looked at him like he'd lost his mind. There was no whistle of incoming rounds, no distant thump of mortars being fired. Nothing but the sound of Sergeant Whiskers' paws scrambling across the plywood floor. Then the world exploded. The first mortar round hit exactly where 6 Marines had been standing 5 seconds earlier. The blast wave knocked Martinez flat, ears ringing, tasting copper and cordite. Through the smoke and chaos, he saw her. Sergeant Whiskers perched on a concrete barrier 30 yards away, calmly grooming her paw as if to say, "I told you so." The attack lasted 17 minutes. 12 mortar rounds, 2 rocket-propelled grenades. When the smoke cleared and the casualty report came in, the miracle was undeniable. 43 Marines in the impact zone, 0 killed, 7 wounded, none critically. Every single man who'd heard Martinez's warning and dove for cover was alive. Lieutenant Colonel James Hawk Morrison had seen enough war to fill several lifetimes. Vietnam, Desert Storm, and now Iraq. He'd lost men before, good men, young men who deserved better than to die in a country that couldn't decide if it wanted them there or not. But today somehow he hadn't added any names to that terrible list. Today a cat had given them a gift beyond measure. "You want to put a cat in for a commendation?" The regimental commander's voice crackled over the satellite phone. Morrison could hear the disbelief, the barely suppressed laughter. But Morrison wasn't laughing. He'd seen the crater where his communications tent had been. He'd counted the shrapnel holes in the walls where his men would have been standing. Without that warning, he'd be writing letters to grieving families instead of making this call. The story should have ended there, a lucky break in a war full of bad ones. But Sergeant Whiskers was just getting started. Over the next 4 months, she would earn her stripes in ways that would make hardened combat veterans believers in the impossible. It started with patterns. Marines are trained to observe, to analyze, to adapt. Corporal Lisa Chen, intelligence analyst, was the first to notice. Every time Sergeant Whiskers disappeared for more than 2 hours, something bad happened. An IED on the supply route. A sniper in the abandoned school. A vehicle-borne explosive at the checkpoint. It was like she had a 6th sense for danger, and she was sharing it with her adopted unit. Chen started a log. Time, date, duration of absence, subsequent incident. After 2 weeks, the correlation was undeniable. 92% accuracy. Better than their $1 million surveillance equipment. Better than their human intelligence networks. A cat was outperforming the entire United States military intelligence apparatus, and Chen had the data to prove it. The Marines weren't the only ones who noticed. The Iraqi children who sometimes gathered outside the wire hoping for candy or soccer balls had their own name for her. Shitat al-Harb, they whispered. The war cat. Local interpreters swore their grandmothers told stories of cats who could see death coming, who served as messengers between this world and the next. Martinez thought it was superstition until he saw the respect, even fear in their eyes when they looked at Sergeant Whiskers. She had her routines. Morning patrol along the perimeter, stopping at specific bunkers like she was checking on her Marines. Afternoon nap in the command post, always positioned where she could see both entrances. Evening rounds during chow, accepting offerings of beef stew and pound cake with regal indifference. But it was the nights that proved her worth. The attack came at Oro 300, that dead hour when exhaustion weighs heaviest and vigilance slips. Sergeant Whiskers erupted into a fury of hissing and yowling that could wake the dead. She raced from bunker to bunker, making such a racket that every Marine was alert, and at their posts a full 45 seconds before the first RPG slammed into their defenses. It should have been a massacre. The insurgents had spent weeks planning, gathering intelligence, waiting for the perfect moment. They had the numbers, the firepower, and the element of surprise. What they didn't have was a tactical cat with an uncanny ability to sense danger and a very loud voice. The firefight raged for 3 hours. Tracers lit up the night like deadly fireworks. The air rang with the staccato burst of M4s and the deeper thunder of 50 caliber machine guns. Through it all, Sergeant Whiskers stayed at her post in the command bunker, yellow eyes reflecting the muzzle flashes as if she was personally overseeing the defense of her domain. When the sun rose over Firebase Phoenix, the attackers had been repelled with heavy losses. The Marines had held their ground, suffering only minor casualties. As the adrenaline faded and exhaustion set in, Chen updated her log with shaking hands. The numbers didn't lie. In 4 months, Sergeant Whiskers had provided early warning for 17 separate attacks. By her calculations, those warnings had prevented at least 60 casualties, possibly more. Morrison stood in the aftermath surveying the damage, counting his blessings and his men. All present and accounted for. He watched Sergeant Whiskers pick her way delicately through the spent brass and debris, tail held high, and made a decision. If the Pentagon wanted to laugh, let them laugh. He was putting her in for an official commendation. How many human soldiers could claim they'd saved 43 lives in a single action? Word spread through the military grapevine like wildfire. Firebase Phoenix had a guardian angel, and she had 4 legs and an attitude. Journalists embedded with other units started asking about the tactical cat. Marines from other outposts would find excuses to visit, just to see if the stories were true. They usually left as believers. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had been in Iraq for 11 months. She'd seen friends die, held young Marines as they bled out, written those impossible letters home. The weight of it all was crushing her, piece by piece. She didn't believe in miracles anymore. Then she met Sergeant Whiskers. It happened during a resupply run. Rodriguez's convoy had stopped at Firebase Phoenix to refuel and grab some hot chow. She was sitting alone, pushing mystery meat around her tray, when she felt something brush against her leg. Sergeant Whiskers sat at her feet, looking up with those penetrating amber eyes. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then the cat did something she'd never done before. She jumped into Rodriguez's lap, curled up, and began to purr. Rodriguez, who hadn't cried since her first firefight, felt tears streaming down her face. She buried her fingers in that soft fur and let 11 months of grief and terror pour out. The other Marines looked away, giving her privacy. They understood. They'd all been there. When Rodriguez's convoy left 2 hours later, she was different, lighter somehow. Like that cat had absorbed some of her pain and transformed it into something bearable. She would finish her tour, go home to Texas, and years later, when the nightmares came, she would think about a purring cat in a war zone and find peace. But Sergeant Whiskers' most incredible save was yet to come. It started with Navy Corpsman First Class David Park, the unit's medic. Doc Park, as everyone called him, had been feeling off for days. Headaches, fatigue, some stomach issues. He chalked it up to the stress, the bad food, the constant vigilance required to keep 43 Marines healthy in a combat zone. Sergeant Whiskers disagreed. She began following Doc Park everywhere, which was unusual. She had her favorites, sure, but she maintained a certain independence. Now she was his shadow, meowing insistently whenever he sat down, pawing at his medical bag, making a general nuisance of herself. "I think your cat's broken, Martinez," Park joked, trying to shoo her away for the 5th time that morning. But Martinez noticed something else. Sergeant Whiskers wasn't just following Doc Park. She was focusing on his right side, sometimes batting at his lower back with her paw. It was specific, deliberate, almost diagnostic. That afternoon, Sergeant Whiskers escalated her campaign. She knocked over Park's coffee, scattered his paperwork, and finally, in an act of desperation, bit him. Not hard, just enough to get his attention. When he bent down to scold her, she pressed her head against his right side and yowled. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was the absurdity of taking medical advice from a cat, but something made Park pay attention. He palpated his right side and felt it. A small, hard mass that shouldn't be there. Within hours, he was on a medevac flight to Baghdad. Within days, Park was in Germany, where doctors removed a tumor from his right kidney. Caught early before it could spread. The surgeon said another few months, and it would have been too late. The news hit Firebase Phoenix like a thunderbolt. Their cat wasn't just detecting incoming attacks. She'd diagnosed cancer. Even the skeptics fell silent. You could explain away a lot of things in war, but not this. Colonel Morrison didn't even try to explain it to his superiors this time. He just submitted the paperwork. Commendation for valor. Extraordinary service. Lives saved through exceptional vigilance. Let them figure out how to process honoring a cat. His men were alive because of her. That's all that mattered. The ceremony was unlike anything Firebase Phoenix had ever seen. 43 Marines in full combat gear, standing at attention in the middle of a war zone, saluting a Persian cat. Martinez had fashioned a tiny purple heart out of fabric and wire. As he pinned it to her collar, Sergeant Whiskers sat perfectly still as if she understood the gravity of the moment. For service above and beyond the call of duty, Morrison read, his voice carrying across the dusty compound. For saving the lives of the Marines of Firebase Phoenix through vigilance, courage, and an inexplicable ability to sense danger. We present this commendation to Sergeant Whiskers, the finest feline to ever serve in the United States Marine Corps. But fame brought problems. The insurgents heard the stories too. In their twisted logic, anything that helped the Americans became a target. Intelligence reports suggested a bounty had been placed on the cat, $20,000 for whoever killed the demon cat of Firebase Phoenix. The Marines took it seriously. Sergeant Whiskers now had her own security detail. The attack they'd been dreading came on a Tuesday. Not at the firebase, but during a patrol. Second Squad was moving through a market area when Sergeant Whiskers, who'd somehow attached herself to their mission, went rigid. She'd done this before, always right before danger struck. But this time was different. She didn't run. She launched herself at Lance Corporal James Thompson, clawing her way up his body armor and wrapping herself around his neck. Thompson's first instinct was to pull her off. Then he heard it. The distinctive crack of a rifle, close and deliberate. The sniper's bullet passed exactly where Thompson's head had been a second before. If Sergeant Whiskers hadn't forced him to bend down, to shift his position, he'd be dead. She'd not only sensed the danger but calculated the trajectory, the timing, the exact action needed to save his life. Lance Corporal Tommy Washington had been at Firebase Phoenix since the beginning. He'd been there the day Sergeant Whiskers arrived, skinny and suspicious. He'd been among the first to feed her, talking to her in that soft voice he used with his little sisters back home. Of all the Marines, Washington had formed the deepest bond with their feline protector. Maybe that's why she tried so hard to save him. The patrol was routine, a presence mission through the relatively quiet Sector 7. Sergeant Whiskers hadn't shown any signs of distress. No warnings, no strange behavior. Just another day in Iraq, until it wasn't. The IED was different from the others. Newer design, better concealed, triggered by a combination of pressure and remote detonation that made it nearly impossible to detect. When Washington's squad turned the corner, Sergeant Whiskers exploded into action. She raced ahead, throwing herself at Washington's legs, trying to trip him, to stop him, to change his path. But momentum and training took over. Washington stepped around her, his boot finding the pressure plate with devastating precision. In that split second before detonation, witnesses swear they saw something impossible. Sergeant Whiskers launched herself upward, placing her small body between Washington and the blast. The explosion was catastrophic. When the dust settled and the ringing in their ears faded, they found Washington thrown clear, concussed and bleeding, but alive. And at the center of the blast crater, a small, still form. Sergeant Whiskers had absorbed enough of the shrapnel and blast force to save Washington's life, at the cost of her own. Doc Park worked frantically, his hands gentle despite their trembling. But there are limits to what even the best combat medic can do. As Washington crawled over, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face, Sergeant Whiskers opened her eyes one last time. She looked at him with those amber eyes that had seen so much, saved so much, and slowly blinked. The universal cat sign of trust and love. She died as the medevac helicopter's rotors beat the air above them. 43 Marines stood in the landing zone, their faces stone, their hearts breaking. They'd lost brothers before. This was different. This was losing something pure in a place that specialized in destroying purity. The memorial service was held at sunset. Morrison had seen too many of these, knew the ritual by heart. But this was unique. Marines who'd faced death without flinching stood with tears streaming down their faces. They buried her with full military honors in a corner of the firebase that overlooked the sector she'd protected. Martinez crafted a marker from scrap metal. Sergeant Whiskers, 2004. She gave her life for ours. As the last shovel of dirt was placed, a strange thing happened. From the ruins beyond the wire, from the alleys and rooftops of Fallujah, cats began to appear. Dozens of them. Possibly hundreds. They sat in silent vigil as the Marines completed the burial. The cats remained until full darkness fell, then disappeared as mysteriously as they'd come. 3 days after Sergeant Whiskers' death, the attacks intensified. It was as if the insurgents knew the Marines had lost their edge, their guardian. The first attack came at dawn, no warning, no intuition telling them to take cover. Just the sudden scream of incoming mortars and the scramble for defensive positions. They held, but it was costly. 3 wounded, 1 critically. Chen noticed it first. The insurgents weren't just attacking more frequently. They were attacking smarter, hitting exactly where the Marines were most vulnerable, at precisely the right moments. Intelligence intercepts mentioned the demon cat. Captured insurgents admitted they'd been ordered to watch for the cat's movements. They'd waited until she was gone to launch their real offensive. But even in loss, her legacy lived on. Marines who'd served at Firebase Phoenix carried her story to other units. Soon, bases throughout Iraq were adopting their own cats, hoping to find another Sergeant Whiskers. None did, but the practice saved countless feline lives and gave soldiers a connection to something beyond the violence. Letters continued to arrive, now offering condolences instead of treats. A class of 3rd graders in Ohio sent a hand-drawn book about Sergeant Whiskers. A veterans group raised money to commission a bronze statue. The mother of a Marine who'd been saved by one of her warnings wrote simply, "Thank you for giving me my son back." Washington returned to duty after 2 weeks. The physical wounds had healed, but he was different. Quieter, more thoughtful. He started volunteering at the aid station, helping Doc Park. "She showed me something," he told Park one evening, "that protecting others isn't about size or strength or even species. It's about choosing to act when it matters most." On their last patrol before rotating home, 2nd Squad took a detour to where Sergeant Whiskers had died. In the middle of the destruction, something impossible had happened. A small flower had bloomed. Desert marigold, bright yellow against the gray dust. Washington knelt beside it, his hand moving to the pocket where he kept her photo. They finished their tour 2 weeks later. 43 Marines had arrived at Firebase Phoenix. 39 were leaving. By any metric, that was a successful deployment. But every one of them knew the number should have been lower without her. Coming home should have been simple. Step off the plane, hug your family, try to remember what normal felt like. But the Marines of Firebase Phoenix carried an unusual burden. How do you explain Sergeant Whiskers to people who weren't there? How do you tell someone that a cat saved your life without sounding insane? Martinez tried with his girlfriend in an Austin coffee shop. She listened patiently as he stumbled through the story, her expression growing more skeptical with each impossible save. "So you're telling me," she said slowly, "that a cat detected incoming attacks, diagnosed cancer, and died saving your friend?" The way she said it made it sound ridiculous. They broke up 2 months later. Part of him was still at Firebase Phoenix, still waiting for a familiar meow. Doc Park threw himself into his medical career, inspired by a cat who'd diagnosed what human doctors had missed. He specialized in early detection, developing an almost supernatural ability to spot what others overlooked. His colleagues joked about his success rate. Park never told them about Sergeant Whiskers, but he kept her photo in his desk drawer. Chen became an analyst for the CIA. Her work on the Sergeant Whiskers logs had impressed someone high up. She specialized in pattern recognition, in finding signals in the noise. Her reports were legendary for their accuracy. In her secure office at Langley, she kept a small ceramic cat on her desk. Washington struggled the most. The survivor's guilt ate at him. Why had Sergeant Whiskers died for him? He drank too much, fought too often, pushed everyone away. Rock bottom came in a VA hospital after a DUI that could have killed someone. A counselor named Tom, a Vietnam vet, listened to the whole story. "She didn't die so you could destroy yourself," Tom said. "She died so you could have a life. What are you going to do with it?" Washington got sober, got his degree, became a veterinary technician, specializing in military working dogs. Every animal he saved was a small payment on an unpayable debt. He told Sergeant Whiskers' story to anyone who would listen, especially the young handlers heading to war zones. Rodriguez became a drill instructor, carrying Sergeant Whiskers' lessons to new generations of Marines. During the Crucible, she'd gather the exhausted recruits and tell them about Firebase Phoenix, about courage coming in unexpected forms. Half thought she was crazy, the other half would remember when they needed it most. 5 years later, General Morrison received a manuscript about Sergeant Whiskers. A journalist had compiled everything, verified incidents, interviews, Chen's data. He approved publication with one condition: proceeds would go to animal rescue in Iraq. The book became a bestseller. Hollywood wanted the rights, Morrison refused. Some stories were too important to trivialize. 10 years passed. The Marines of Firebase Phoenix stayed connected through social media and email chains. Every year on the anniversary of Sergeant Whiskers' death, they'd check in. They called it Whiskers Day. The 2014 gathering in Dallas brought 32 of the original 43 together. "Remember when she stole Morrison's cigar?" Santos laughed. The room erupted. Even Morrison, retired now and grayer, joined the laughter. But Chen had brought something serious, her logs now declassified. She'd continued analyzing them, applying new theories. "I think I figured out how she did it," she said. "Infrasound, electromagnetic fields, enhanced senses we don't have." "I don't care how she did it," Park said. "I care that she chose to protect us. That's the miracle." An unexpected guest changed everything. Khalid al-Rashid, an Iraqi doctor, showed them a worn photo of teenage himself with Sergeant Whiskers. "She didn't just protect Americans," he said. "She'd led him to Dock Park when his brother was dying. She'd warned his family of danger. My mother called her Malik, angel." The revelation shifted their understanding. Sergeant Whiskers hadn't chosen sides. She'd simply chosen life over death. Morrison decided half the book proceeds should go to Iraqi organizations. The reunion sparked new initiatives: scholarships for veterinary students, support for war zone animal rescue, a foundation transcending borders. In 2018, the Pentagon made it official. Sergeant Whiskers was inducted into the Military Working Dog Hall of Fame, the first cat ever honored. 38 Firebase Phoenix veterans attended. CNN's documentary for the 20th anniversary of Iraq featured her story. "The cat who changed military doctrine," they called it. Morrison appeared on camera. "She saved 43 directly. But indirectly, thousands, every unit that adopted a cat. Every soldier who paid attention to animal warnings." The Pentagon issued new guidelines incorporating animal behavior into threat assessment. What Sergeant Whiskers did by instinct became doctrine. Park's research on interspecies disease detection, inspired by her diagnosis, was revolutionizing medicine. Detection rates had improved dramatically worldwide. Insurance companies funded programs training animals for disease detection. "She's still saving lives," Park told colleagues. 20 years later, still saving lives. 22 veterans gathered at Arlington Cemetery for a memorial stone dedication. As they stood in silence, a gray cat appeared from behind a headstone. She walked to their gathering, sat at the memorial, and purred for exactly 7 minutes before disappearing. They never spoke of it publicly. Some things were too sacred for words. In 2020, Washington stood before his veterinary students, Sergeant Whiskers' photo projected behind him. "She taught us war's most important lesson," he said. That in humanity's worst moments, grace appears, that heroes come in all sizes, that sometimes the universe sends exactly what we need, we just have to listen. Do you think there are other Sergeant Whiskers out there? A student asked. I know there are. Washington smiled. In every shelter, on every corner, in every moment we choose protection over indifference. She wasn't unique because she was magical. She was magical because she chose to care. That choice is available to all of us, every single day. The story had evolved beyond them now. Military units worldwide reported similar experiences. Animals warning of danger, cross-species bonds saving lives. The Sergeant Whiskers Foundation had rescued thousands of animals from war zones, funded clinics in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, built bridges where politics had built walls. In Fallujah, Dr. Amira Hassan's clinic had grown into a full hospital. The walls displayed photos from around the world, military units with their guardian cats. One photo held prominence, Khalid and Washington at the clinic's anniversary. Former enemies turned brothers by a cat's love. Below it, compassion recognizes no uniform. Martinez, teaching high school now, kept her story alive for new generations. Every choice matters, he'd tell his students. A cat in a war zone chose to protect strangers. What are you choosing? His classroom walls held letters from students who'd been inspired to volunteer at shelters, become veterinarians, join the military to protect others. Chen, retired from the CIA, wrote academic papers on interspecies communication. Universities invited her to lecture. She always ended with Sergeant Whiskers. The most sophisticated intelligence network in the world was outperformed by a cat who chose to share her gifts. Humility and openness to the impossible. Those are the real lessons. Rodriguez trained new Marines to watch for animal behavior. They see what we miss, she'd tell them. Stay humble, stay observant. Guardian angels don't always look like angels. Her trainees would deploy worldwide, carrying Sergeant Whiskers' legacy to new conflicts, new bases, new guardian animals waiting to be recognized. That night, Washington visited the local shelter. In cage 7, a tabby pressed against the bars, amber eyes meeting his, ready to be someone's guardian angel. The cat purred. Somewhere, across time and space, Sergeant Whiskers purred too. Her mission continues, one saved life at a time, forever on patrol, forever teaching that love wears infinite faces and heroism knows no bounds. Like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. This channel is for those who believe history is made not only by armies, but by individual courage.